Lee Marvin, born on February 19, 1924, in New York City, left an indelible mark on Hollywood as one of its most rugged and distinctive leading men. Yet behind the gruff persona, the Western gunslingers, and the comedic anti-heroes he portrayed, there was a deeply intricate personal life, riddled with impulsive decisions, unsteady relationships, and near constant battling with the bottle. The triumphs of his long career, an Oscar, a gold record, the adulation of fans for his toughness on screen, were mirrored by heartbreaks off the set, culminating in high-profile legal battles, broken families, and a final decade dogged by illness and regret. To appreciate the full complexity of Marvin's fate, it's worth retracing the entire winding road from his New York upbringing to his final roles opposite younger, fast-rising co-stars. And interwoven with that saga is the turbulent relationship he had with singer and dancer Michelle Triola, whose lawsuit, unofficially known as the Palimony suit, exposed the darkest secrets of Marvin's private life, from forced terminations of pregnancy to the systematic ways in which he cast off lovers once they no longer fit into his plans. Marvin spent his earliest years in an environment that, while not opulent, was comfortable enough for a 1920s middle-class household in New York. His father, Lamont, worked in the advertising field, and his mother, Courtney, was a fashion editor with occasional stints as a beauty consultant. These small advantages did not insulate the family from domestic friction or from young Lee's rebellious streak. School quickly became a battleground for him. Marvin loathed rules, cut classes, fought with classmates, and tested teachers' patience. As a child, he had dyslexia and ADHD, conditions not well understood or sympathetically treated in those days. He channeled some of his restlessness into playing the violin. He later joked that his parents forced him to learn, but the real impetus might have been an attempt to keep him disciplined. Equally significant was his passion for hunting. Throughout the rest of his life, he'd remember with perverse fondness the teenage years spent in upstate fields with a rifle, searching for small game. That fascination with firearms, ironically, prepared him for the real shooting he'd do in World War II. Marvin enlisted in the U.S. Marines and found himself thrust into the brutal Pacific Theater. He participated in the Battle of Saipan, among other engagements, enduring nights of terror amid the suffocating humidity and the thunder of mortar shells. One bullet or piece of shrapnel, depending on which anecdote one reads, tore into his body, leaving him severely wounded and nearly killing him. For that service, he earned the Purple Heart and a measure of celebrity among fellow Marines. The experience also hardened him, instilling a sarcasm or cynicism that would show up in his acting. Once the war ended, Marvin returned stateside, drifting from job to job, a plumber's assistant, a waiter, even a store clerk. Fate intervened when a community theater recognized his potential to fill in for an actor who had taken ill. In that tiny production, Marvin discovered that performing on stage was exhilarating and might be a path to financial security. He promptly decided to become an actor, ignoring the fact that he had almost no formal training. He had determination, raw presence, and a war hero's story that might appeal to show business managers. Late in 1950, he found modest roles in theater, culminating in a Broadway cameo. But it was film that really beckoned. Hollywood was hiring ex-servicemen for war pictures, and Marvin's credentials allowed him to land a tiny role in the 1951 film You're in the Navy Now, starring Gary Cooper. Although his part was so small he didn't even receive on-screen credit, it was the nudge he needed to settle in Los Angeles. He recognized that the camera picked up something in his face, a mixture of battered wariness and rebellious mischief. Directors also discovered that Marvin's authenticity made him an ideal presence in war movies. They valued his readiness to advise on how a real soldier might act under fire. Marvin found that his comedic, reckless style offset was tempered by near-obsessive authenticity on camera. Other ex-servicemen hired for supporting roles recognized him as a no-nonsense figure who neither apologized for his impulsive behaviors nor tried to hide them. 1952 was a busy year for him, but it also witnessed him stepping into a new role in his personal life: husband. He married Betty Ebeling in Las Vegas, a sudden, somewhat romantic, somewhat intoxicated event. By 1958, they had produced 4 children, forging the facade of a stable father figure. Yet the fatherly side of Marvin was overshadowed by what many co-stars found to be unstoppable partying. He was known to vanish from sets for entire nights, returning reeking of whiskey or wearing the same clothes from the day before. Amazingly, directors also found that a mild hangover or slight intoxication sometimes benefited his edgy performances. He stepped into villainous roles with an unsettling realism. A prime example was The Big Heat, 1953, in which he portrayed a gangster who famously throws scalding coffee onto Gloria Graham's character. That moment horrified audiences and imprinted Marvin as the big screen's go-to heavy for the rest of the decade. He also tested that villain persona off the set, romancing multiple women. In 1954's Gorilla at Large, he met Anne Boft, and they embarked on a discreet affair that continued when they re-teamed in A Life in the Balance. Observers saw that Marvin's comedic wisecracks offset a core cynicism, as though he found it all a big game, toggling between father-husband at home and rebellious adulterer on location. Directors put up with it because he delivered vicious or comedic villains like no one else. Then a twist occurred. In 1957, he was cast as a tough Chicago detective in the TV series M Squad, where for once he was the heroic center rather than the baddie. The show ran for 117 episodes, but it ended in 1960, leaving Marvin unemployed for a full year. He sank into depression, intensifying the bottle. The rumor mill said that no major studio wanted to hire him because of his unreliability, his drunken spats, and the unpredictability overshadowing his entire presence. Yet he rebounded with small cameo appearances in B-movies and genre pictures. These, ironically, gave him the chance to show comedic undertones, bridging the bad boy persona with comedic flair. 1965 brought a turning point. He joined the cast of Stanley Kramer's Ship of Fools, a drama set aboard a fictional ocean liner carrying a cross-section of troubled passengers. Among them was the iconic Vivien Leigh, star of Gone with the Wind, who was now in a state of mental decline and heavy drinking. The pair disliked each other at first, each suspecting the other of overshadowing the production. Meanwhile, a lesser-known singer-dancer named Michelle Triola had a small part. Capricious as ever, Marvin took more interest in Triola than in smoothing tensions with Leigh. Triola, an attractive, sweet-voiced performer, was drawn to Marvin's war hero mystique. They soon began an affair, and Marvin impulsively decided that after Ship of Fools, he would move in with Triola. He left behind his wife Betty and their 4 kids, shocking them. The year 1965 was also huge professionally. He starred in Cat Ballou, a comedic western in which he portrayed 2 very different characters, the drunken outlaw Kid Shalene and the wicked Tim Strawn. That comedic dual role might have looked like silly fluff, but to the entire industry's astonishment, it earned Marvin the Best Actor Oscar. Even co-star Jane Fonda admitted she found it baffling that his comedic half-souse performance triumphed over serious competition that year. In any event, Marvin soared to new heights. He now commanded high salaries, though the comedic twist was that Cat Ballou had been so replete with on-set drunkenness that it was widely rumored Fonda found him nearly intolerable to work with. By this point, he was living with Triola in a modest beach house, spurning official marriage, but forging a relationship that, in many respects, was domestic. Triola gave up her singing career to become the girlfriend turned housewife, cooking, cleaning, redecorating. But she had to watch from the sidelines as Marvin reveled in stardom, tossing back whiskey on sets, disappearing for nights with old Marine buddies, and sometimes flirting with co-stars. He had become an unstoppable free spirit, a comedic presence who also carried a mean streak if crossed. Directors revered him for the 1966 war ensemble film The Dirty Dozen, where he anchored the motley group of criminals turned commandos with a stoic leadership. More offers followed, letting him star opposite the likes of Burt Lancaster in The Professionals and John Vernon in Point Blank. However, on each set, feuds erupted. Marvin demanded top billing, bigger salary shares, and full leeway to indulge his near-constant boozing. Some said that in Point Blank, John Vernon almost walked off due to Marvin's on-set intimidation. The comedic side of his persona lurked too. In 1969, he got a call from Sam Peckinpah, the renegade director behind Ride the High Country, who was working on The Wild Bunch. A gritty, violent Western that would revolutionize the genre. The Wild Bunch offered Marvin a chance to star. He tentatively accepted. But the comedic curve came when he got a better-paying offer for Paint Your Wagon, an offbeat Western musical starring him and Clint Eastwood. Marvin soared at the thought of a fatter paycheck, so he deserted The Wild Bunch at the last minute. That turned out to be, arguably, the biggest misstep of his career. The Wild Bunch earned critical acclaim as a masterpiece, while Paint Your Wagon, though not an outright flop financially, garnered scathing reviews and has since been remembered more as a novelty. Some fans recall it only for the comedic line from The Simpsons, referencing Marvin's drunken, violent persona. Yet ironically, Paint Your Wagon gave Marvin an improbable gold record. His untrained singing voice in Wanderin' Star soared up international charts, overshadowing Eastwood's comedic attempt at singing. The comedic angle is that Marvin, with no formal singing training, ended up overshadowing a co-star who had a more typical leading man appeal. At home, Triola endured each new comedic or dramatic turn in Marvin's career. She wanted marriage, but Marvin wouldn't propose. She legally changed her surname to Marvin, adopting it for professional and personal use, presumably to stake her claim. Meanwhile, Marvin occasionally returned to old flames. One in particular haunted him. In 1945, he had impregnated a teenage girlfriend, Pamela Feely, and convinced her to get an illegal abortion. She barely survived, but decades later, around 1970, with Triola in his beach house, Marvin visited the older Pamela, waltzed into her life, and declared he wanted to marry her. Triola was stunned at the betrayal, so after he left her for Feely, Triola sued him. She claimed half his earnings, asserting a common-law marriage or something akin to it, by virtue of them living together as husband and wife for years. She also exposed shocking secrets. While living with her, Marvin had forced her to have multiple abortions. One of them resulted in complications that left Triola unable to have children. She insisted that Marvin had promised to support her for life, had extracted from her the comedic performance of domestic wife in exchange for financial security. Marvin refused to capitulate. The comedic illusions of free-spirited romance turned into a legal circus. The Palimony suit, as tabloids called it, was sensational, partially overshadowing the comedic-laden presence of an actor known for tough guy roles. The court eventually awarded Triola $104,000, though not the million she had demanded. She recognized it as a partial victory. He spun it as comedic confirmation that she wasn't entitled to half his fortune. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Triola as a manipulative gold digger. Others saw her as a victim of an exploitative star. The comedic illusions around Marvin's personal brand, the lovable rogue, had fractured to reveal a destructive pattern of discarding women once they no longer fit into his trajectory. Marvin promptly married Feely, fulfilling his "I came to get you" vow. The comedic twist was that this new marriage ironically triggered more scorn, since Feely too had a complicated past with him. Meanwhile, Michelle Triola ended up in a decades-long relationship with comedic icon Dick Van Dyke. That comedic dynamic seemed more stable, though they never married. Van Dyke kept Triola by his side until her death, describing her as a supportive companion. In a comedic footnote, some observers joke that Triola's presence might have softened Van Dyke's comedic edges, but the reality is that they lived a quieter existence than the chaos that had marked Triola's time with Marvin. As for Marvin's subsequent career, he soared financially but faced comedic fiascos in production. On The Great Scout and Cat House Thursday, 1976, co-starring Oliver Reed, he found a match in the boozing department. The comedic challenge was that each tried to outdrink the other, nearly derailing filming. By the end, Marvin collapsed from intoxication during one marathon session. Scenes like that fed the comedic rumor that Marvin's unstoppable drinking overshadowed all else. Yet directors still cast him because he had star power that sold tickets. In The Big Red One, 1980, a World War II epic from director Samuel Fuller, he displayed a measure of sobriety. But comedic controversies followed. He greeted new co-stars, including Mark Hamill and Robert Carradine, with silent hostility, then eventually cursed them. It took the comedic approach of Fuller to quell the tension enough to finish the film. Marvin's health, hammered by decades of whiskey, was failing. He had colon inflammation, repeated hospitalizations, and diminishing resilience, but comedic illusions about unstoppable energy lingered. He forced himself to film Delta Force, 1986, with Chuck Norris. The comedic mismatch was plain. Norris was younger, agile, while Marvin was frail, doping himself with painkillers just to stand. The comedic illusions of tough old war hero no longer served him well on camera. He died in 1987, leaving behind a complicated personal legacy. The comedic illusions that had once fueled his every move had crumbled. Old collaborators described how sorrowful he seemed in those final months, aware that his best days were behind him. His first wife, Betty Ebeling, wrote a memoir claiming that Marvin left their 4 children just $10,000 total from his estate. That meager inheritance underscored how he had drifted from paternal obligations. Instead, comedic illusions about being a free spirit overshadowed familial duties. Triola, despite the suit, never saw a cent beyond the small settlement. She discovered that comedic illusions about guaranteed common law wife status were worthless in the face of cold legal realities. Near the end, rumors circulated that Marvin, in a comedic twist, had only saved 4 personal mementos: his Best Actor Oscar for Cat Ballou, the National Cowboy Hall of Fame citation, the gold record for Wandering Star, and a single high-heeled shoe belonging to Vivian Lee, a relic from Ship of Fools, rumored to be the shoe she'd thrown at him in a drunken spat. The comedic irony is that these items each represented a bizarre chapter in his life, comedic accomplishments overshadowing real heartbreak, cinematic illusions overshadowing stable relationships. In the broad narrative of Hollywood's golden to mid era, Marvin's story might read like comedic happenstance. The incompetent student turned war hero, turned iconic tough guy, turned comedic Western star who accidentally soared to an Oscar. But that comedic reading downplays the genuine heartbreak he inflicted on women who encountered him, and on the children who ended up with partial or no paternal engagement. The comedic illusions about unstoppable drinking might amuse a certain brand of fan, but they overshadow how numerous sets found him genuinely destructive, and the comedic illusions of an unstoppable romance with Triola ended in a scathing lawsuit that forced abortion stories, infidelity, and manipulations into public record. Some might see a comedic storyline in how, after all that, he ended up returning to a teenage sweetheart and marrying her. Yet the comedic illusions yield to a sorrowful truth. It suggests a man who never overcame regrets about choices made in youth, relitigating them decades later in impulsive, injurious ways. Beyond those first impressions of Lee Marvin as a moody, liquor-loving iconoclast, there lurked a more nuanced dynamic. The synergy between his erratic, sometimes destructive impulses and the potent performances that earned him lasting admiration from directors like John Boorman, Robert Aldrich, John Ford, Samuel Fuller, and others who recognized the raw energy he brought to the screen. Such a synergy seems to trace its origins to Marvin's early days, when he first discovered that spontaneity, verging on chaos, could yield vivid authenticity. Indeed, the unpredictability he displayed off-camera often translated into roles that felt spontaneous, unrestrained, and, at times, scathingly real. It was as if his vices and comedic outbursts merged into a secret engine powering his portrayals, whether comedic in tone or disturbingly savage. Of course, this synergy had a steep price. Crew members and co-stars routinely found it exhausting to handle him. On a good day, his comedic illusions, oversized bravado, playful mockery of the script, were entertaining, breathing life into tired sets. But on a bad day, that comedic bravado easily flipped into menacing aggression, fueled by whiskey or frustration. A few possessed the patience or professional code to endure the chaos if it meant a more powerful end product on film. Directors like Robert Aldrich, who hired Marvin for Attack 1956, and The Dirty Dozen 1967, recognized that the tension in the man's private demons added an electric charge to his screen presence. Aldrich once reportedly told a colleague that Marvin's bar fights and 3 a.m. rants might be a small cost if the next morning's shot emerged with the authenticity only Marvin could provide. It was an uneasy trade-off. The comedic illusion swirling around him might sabotage an entire day's shooting, but also push him toward a feral brilliance when the cameras rolled. John Boorman, similarly, harnessed Marvin's volatility in Point Blank 1967, a film that straddled the lines between comedic dryness, existential noir, and raw violence. Here, Marvin's character roams a surreal Los Angeles, seeking vengeance for a double cross, with minimal dialogue and maximum stoic ferocity. This role demanded a grim presence, an unspoken comedic cynicism that signaled both savage determination and deadpan humor. Boorman recognized that only an actor with Marvin's personal unpredictability could occupy that territory, where comedic illusions might flicker momentarily, overshadowed by startling eruptions of brutality. Rumor has it that on days when Marvin was feeling particularly combative, the ferocity in his performance soared, creating moments even Boorman hadn't scripted. Co-star John Vernon allegedly discovered that, although the comedic illusions in Marvin's banter offset any tension, the second action was called the comedic veneer vanished, replaced by an unnerving predator's gaze. Vernon's apprehension in certain scenes wasn't merely acting, it was genuine reaction to Marvin's unpredictable aura. Then there was Sam Fuller, a World War II veteran turned director who specialized in gritty, psychologically charged pictures. Fuller cast Marvin in The Big Red One, 1980, a personal retelling of the director's own infantry experiences. Fuller saw in Marvin a comedic cynic who also carried genuine soldier scars, both literal and metaphorical. It was an alchemy that gave the film a bleak comedic tone, where the brutality of war collided with absurd jokes, and the men survived by mocking their own hopeless circumstances. Marvin's comedic allusions offset, his bragging, his improvised wisecracks, became stepping stones to exploring a character who coped with war's madness through dark humor. But that synergy also revealed the cost to Marvin's body. By 1980, decades of heavy drinking had left him frail. He frequently needed to medicate for stomach pain. Between takes, he slouched in a folding chair, sweating, his comedic illusions momentarily dimmed. Yet once Fuller called him forward for a scene, Marvin mustered a dryness that soared on camera, a dryness reflecting a life's worth of comedic illusions used to conceal real trauma. All these collaborations highlight a pattern. The comedic illusions that advance Marvin's star power might overshadow personal relationships. People close to him found it perilous to remain in his orbit for too long, lest they become collateral in some drunken meltdown or comedic meltdown. At the same time, producers recognized that those illusions delighted audiences. Fans read about Marvin's bar brawls or unpredictable on-set fights and found it tantalizing, perhaps seeing them as proof of authenticity. In an era when many stars cultivated sanitized public images, Marvin's comedic illusions of the unstoppable, reckless war hero lent him an edge. The more he misbehaved, the more the tabloids wrote about it, ironically strengthening his brand as the real tough guy, overshadowing the polished illusions of other more refined leading men. Which brings us to his most surprising triumph, that Oscar for Cat Ballou, 1965. The comedic premise was borderline silly, a Western so broad it occasionally verged on slapstick, with Marvin playing the double role of the drunken gunfighter Kid Shalene and the evil Tim Strawn. On set, Jane Fonda disliked him, considering him juvenile and undependable. But the comedic illusions swirling around Marvin had magical synergy with the script. He approached Kid Shalene's inebriated buffoonery with genuine authenticity. He was half drunk much of the time. The comedic illusions that the role demanded aligned perfectly with his real life, bridging the line between performance and self. When the Academy awarded him Best Actor, many in Hollywood felt flabbergasted. Among the year's more serious nominees, how did a comedic cowboy routine take the top prize? Marvin even joked about it in his acceptance speech, acknowledging how improbable it was. Yet the comedic illusions that overshadowed more typical lead performances had worked. The Academy, perhaps tired of solemn pictures, embraced Marvin's unexpected comedic flair. This comedic bravura solidified his name among the era's top stars, though it also inflated his sense of invincibility, further cementing that sense of comedic illusions overshadowing deeper issues was the anecdote about Paint Your Wagon, 1969. Marvin turned down Sam Peckinpah's brutal, groundbreaking Western The Wild Bunch for the comedic musical, simply because Paint Your Wagon offered him a bigger paycheck. That decision might have seemed comedic in the moment, swapping a violent masterpiece for a comedic singing role with Clint Eastwood. But in hindsight, it was a missed chance to star in one of the century's most revered Westerns. The comedic illusion suggested that a bigger paycheck was all that mattered, overshadowing the possible longevity of working with Peckinpah. Paint Your Wagon, while remembered, is overshadowed by comedic references to the dissonance of Marvin's whiskey-laden singing voice. Indeed, Wand'rin' Star, which ironically became a gold record, is often singled out as comedic proof that Marvin's raw talk-singing style could, with the right comedic allusions, surpass Eastwood's more standard approach on the same soundtrack. In comedic lore, people recall that the film's behind-the-scenes revelry included more partying than rehearsals, overshadowing any genuine attempt to ensure the musical soared. This synergy of comedic allusions and savage presence sometimes manifested in real hostility. During The Professionals, 1966, for instance, Burt Lancaster reportedly found Marvin's behind-the-scenes jokes less comedic than borderline insubordinate. Tension was high, though ironically that friction fed the film's dynamic, two rugged men at cross purposes. Audiences saw comedic allusions in the banter, not suspecting an undercurrent of genuine bitterness. Similarly, in Ship of Fools, 1965, the comedic allusions of an unstoppable star overshadowed the meltdown he shared with Vivien Leigh. They despised each other, but the comedic allusions of an industry that liked to talk about chemistry overshadowed how brutal that set was to endure. Marvin slipped deeper into intoxication, while Leigh struggled with mental instability, each quietly resenting the other's presence. What emerges from this tapestry is that the comedic allusions fueling Marvin's star persona indeed advanced his career. Directors recognized that, for certain roles, no one else could capture that same tension between comedic dryness and lethal menace. The comedic allusions gave him an unpredictability that overshadowed the refined illusions of typical Hollywood leads. Younger co-stars found him mesmerizing, if occasionally terrifying. The synergy was unstoppable in roles that needed comedic tension or savage aggression. Yet in personal relationships, those illusions rotted trust. Marvin's ex-wife Betty, for instance, endured years of him hurling comedic barbs about her cooking or maternal style, overshadowing real affection with the comedic alpha routine. She eventually divorced him. Triola suffered not only heartbreak but forced abortions, overshadowed by comedic illusions that they were living in sin in a carefree beach house. The illusions collapsed when Marvin abruptly left her, leading to that notorious Palimony suit. One sees a comedic code that Marvin used. He wanted to be beloved as a freewheeling, boisterous man's man, overshadowing the moral accountability he might have faced for discarding pregnant girlfriends or forcibly urging them to terminate pregnancies. This comedic posture prevented him from forging deeper empathy with the women in his life. Even with his children, stories abound that comedic allusions overshadowed paternal warmth. A father who gave them comedic spins on war stories but rarely sat down for a heartfelt talk. That comedic posture might have made them laugh or stand in awe, but it left them starved for a real emotional connection. Robert Aldrich, who directed Marvin in Attack, 1956, and The Dirty Dozen, 1967, was among those who insisted that Marvin's comedic allusions were integral to his brilliance. Aldrich's set often thrived on rowdy humor, encouraging men to outdo each other in machismo. Marvin, brandishing comedic illusions of unstoppable bravado, overshadowed co-stars such as Ernest Borgnine or John Cassavetes, who themselves had flamboyant personalities. But Aldrich also noticed that if Marvin arrived on set hungover or furious from a personal row, the comedic illusions might devolve into real tension, overshadowing the entire day's schedule. In the final analysis, Aldrich accepted that this synergy was a double-edged sword, a comedic mania that made Marvin luminous on film, but inflicted chaos in day-to-day production. Likewise, John Ford, who had seen many big personalities in his time, considered Marvin for roles in comedic westerns or war dramas. If Ford recognized comedic illusions overshadowing moral accountability, he seldom said so publicly, likely concluding that some storms were worth weathering for the sake of cinematic gold. By the late 1960s, though, Ford was in ill health himself, and younger directors took over the baton. Marvin's comedic illusions found new homes, but with each set, the pattern repeated. Comedic synergy overshadowed real personal decency, leading to fights, grudges, and ironically, fueling more talk about how he was the real deal. In that sense, the comedic illusions, ironically, advanced his star. The more rumors spread about him being a wild drunk, the more some producers wanted him for a role as an unhinged mercenary or an edgy lawman. Fans ate it up. He rose to be the world's highest-paid male star at one point, overshadowing men who might have seemed more stable. Yet he squandered opportunities, like the Wild Bunch, overshadowed by comedic illusions, that a bigger paycheck for Paint Your Wagon was the correct path. Historians look back and see comedic illusions. Did he truly weigh the artistic potential, or was he simply enthralled by the comedic idea of being a singing cowboy for more money? The result is that film historians lament his absence from Peckinpah's masterpiece. Ultimately, Marvin's synergy with destructive impulses reached a natural conclusion as he aged. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, comedic illusions couldn't mask the toll on his body. His health issues, particularly colon ailments, flared. On The Big Red One, he reportedly needed hospital visits, overshadowing the comedic illusions of him being unstoppable. Sam Fuller, deeply sympathetic, tried to accommodate him with comfortable chairs on set and shorter shooting days. Marvin still delivered strong work, but the comedic illusions of his youthful mania were waning. He had grown slow, paunchy, though still with that lethal glint in the eye. Directors recognized that the synergy between comedic illusions and savage capacity was now overshadowed by sheer physical debilitation. His final decade saw a scramble of roles, from big-budget fiascos to ill-conceived television spin-offs. The Dirty Dozen Next Mission ironically tried to recapture the comedic illusions of his 1967 persona, overshadowing the reality that 17 years had passed. The comedic approach of retconning or ignoring the age gap fooled no one. Marvin looked well beyond retirement age, overshadowing whatever comedic synergy the screenplay tried to muster. Then there was Delta Force, 1986, with Chuck Norris, in which a rapidly declining Marvin had to stand alongside a star known for martial arts prowess. The comedic illusions overshadowing the film were that Marvin was still the same alpha presence. In truth, he was in near constant pain, doping himself to endure stunts he shouldn't have attempted. He died on August 29, 1987, of a heart attack, overshadowed by the comedic illusions that had fueled him for decades. Only a close set of friends and some loyal admirers recognized the pathos behind the swagger. Indeed, his casket was draped with an American flag, honoring his Marine service. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, a final tribute to the war hero, overshadowed by comedic illusions of unstoppable Hollywood success. The comedic illusions left behind overshadowed the reality that family ties were frayed. Ex-lovers had lawsuits ongoing. Children had complicated, if not resentful, feelings. In the years since, critics have rewatched films like Cat Ballou or Point Blank and concluded that Marvin's synergy with destructive impulses indeed shaped the energy on screen. The comedic illusions of unstoppable mania made for riveting scenes, overshadowing the typical polish of leading men who kept their real selves hidden. Today, fans might label him an example of method-adjacent acting, though he never systematically studied with method teachers. Instead, he let comedic illusions and personal vices bubble into the performance, overshadowing the typical separation of actor and role. For better or worse, it made him unique. That uniqueness stands as his legacy. The comedic illusions that overshadowed moral decency or well-being are the same illusions that gave him a disarming comedic edge. One can read interviews from co-stars who mention that, behind the scenes, they were torn between terror and admiration. Directors talk about how they had to keep the whiskey supply locked away until filming wrapped for the day. Some found it comedic, overshadowed by the fear that Marvin might lash out if his illusions of autonomy were challenged. Indeed, a man who once calmly told a director, "I'll do it my way or not at all," overshadowed any comedic attempts at negotiation. In a final sense, Marvin's synergy with comedic illusions and destructive impulses left a contradictory legacy. He soared to an Oscar for comedic heroism in Cat Ballou, overshadowing more serious contenders. He wreaked havoc behind the scenes while delivering roles that remain cult favorites, overshadowing co-stars who played by the rules. He manipulated or forcibly ended relationships, overshadowing the personal cost to pregnant girlfriends and partners like Triola, whose forced abortions remain an ugly secret in that era's hush. He fathered 4 children, but left them paltry sums in his will, overshadowing paternal obligations with comedic illusions of self-sufficiency. Perhaps the best summary is that comedic illusions advanced Lee Marvin's star power even as they laid waste to personal relationships and certain career opportunities. They shaped the synergy that brought savage brilliance to The Dirty Dozen, comedic duality to Cat Ballou, an eerie threat to Point Blank, and a misguided cameo in Paint Your Wagon. People might label him a comedic or tragic figure in Hollywood's pantheon, comedic illusions overshadowing paternal or spousal responsibilities, comedic illusions overshadowing more carefully mapped careers, comedic illusions overshadowing the ultimate heartbreak that came with age and bodily decline. And in the end, that synergy fueled by comedic illusions stands as both the impetus for his improbable success and the underlying factor in his downfall. 2 halves of a single, inextricable reality in the life of Lee Marvin. Interestingly, one anecdote from Point Blank suggests that, behind the comedic illusions, Marvin was deeply in tune with the method approach. He insisted on multiple takes for a scene where his character beats up a man in a nightclub, detailing precisely how his Marine training told him to pivot and strike. He was comedic in his off-camera banter, but on camera, he unleashed a raw authenticity. John Vernon found him terrifying, as though the comedic illusions disappeared in the blink of an eye, replaced by a war vet's savage muscle memory. That duality might define Marvin's entire career. Comedic illusions offset by lethal realism. The comedic illusions seduced directors who believed he could handle comedic or violent extremes, culminating in roles ranging from comedic buffoon to war-hardened sergeant. In the end, the comedic illusions of unstoppable success were undone by inevitable physical decline. The final roles, especially in The Dirty Dozen Next Mission, found him too old to reprise a part that chronologically was meant to be set just weeks after the original. The comedic mismatch jarred audiences. Then Delta Force hammered home that comedic illusions cannot hide an aging star's ailments. Chuck Norris performed stunts while Marvin, evidently in pain, delivered lines stiffly, Fans recognized that the comedic illusions of Marvin as an unstoppable soldier had become a sad echo. He died in August 1987 from a heart attack, not colon cancer as some rumored, though colon inflammation had contributed to his overall poor health. His passing triggered modest tributes from the film community, praising him as an iconic tough guy, but rarely dissecting the comedic illusions that shaped his personal life. Over time, more revelations about Triola's forced terminations, about the unkind settlement for his 4 kids, and about the comedic illusions that overshadowed each new stage in his career, emerged in memoirs and posthumous interviews. The final portrait is not comedic at all. It's tragic. Yet for certain fans, the comedic illusions remain, that unstoppable presence in Cat Ballou, the comedic tough guy in The Dirty Dozen, the comedic anti-hero in Paint Your Wagon, bumbling tunes out in a whiskey-laced baritone. If that comedic memory pleases them, so be it, but it does obscure the far darker side that unraveled behind the scenes. As for Triola, her name would resurface each time the word Palimony was used in popular media. She never again soared to personal stardom, but found a measure of solace with comedic icon Dick Van Dyke, an intriguing epilogue that might be comedic if it weren't for the sense that she had endured too much heartbreak along the way. She died in 2009, with Van Dyke lauding her quiet strength and the unwavering companionship they'd shared for 30 years. The comedic illusions of her being a gold digger softened in the eyes of those who recognized she was, after all, an earnest performer forced to navigate Marvin's chaotic orbit. Meanwhile, Marvin's children from his first marriage, along with the mother Betty, echoed a sense of mild resentment that the father's comedic illusions overshadowed paternal obligations. That one-time plumber from a comfortable background in New York soared to Hollywood's comedic apex, yet personal obligations be damned. Thus stands the labyrinthine story of Lee Marvin, the comedic illusions that furthered his career, fueled by heavy drinking, overshadowed deeper moral responsibilities. He soared to an Oscar by comedic happenstance, then lost out on major roles like The Wild Bunch. He hopped from one film to another, often choosing bigger paychecks over more lasting artistry, culminating in Paint Your Wagon and that comedic gold record for Wandering Star, but overshadowing the chance for cinematic immortality in Sam Peckinpah's masterpiece. He inflicted heartbreak on multiple partners, culminating in a legal fiasco that spilled tragic secrets into the public sphere. He concluded life worn down, reliant on medication, embroiled in comedic illusions about unstoppable masculinity. Ultimately, those illusions crumbled as age and deteriorating health forced him to become a comedic caricature of the tough man he once embodied so effortlessly. In sum, the comedic illusion swirling around Lee Marvin's legend must be balanced with the harsh reality that his personal life was rife with cruelty, forced abortions, neglected fatherhood, the betrayal of longtime lovers, and an over-reliance on whiskey. The comedic illusions propelled him in an industry that ironically thrives on such contradictions, but they also guaranteed a lonely path at the final stage. The audience who sees him in Cat Ballou or The Dirty Dozen might chuckle at the comedic friction, but behind the camera and within the hush of court trials, the illusions parted, revealing a battered soul who never quite found the secure acceptance he hungered for. That, perhaps, is Lee Marvin's final epitaph. Comedic illusions forging an unforgettable screen presence, while tragedy gnawed relentlessly at the man behind the scowl.